The dust from the Kansas prairie settled on Clara Whitmore's worn boots as she stepped into Morrison's general store, her last 3 pennies clutched so tightly in her palm that they left red impressions on her skin. It was August of 1876, and the small town of Abilene had seen better days since the cattle drive slowed and the railroad shifted its focus westward. Clara had seen better days, too. At 23 years old, she should have been planning a wedding or raising babies, but instead, she was alone in a world that did not favor women without husbands or family. Her father had died 2 years earlier from pneumonia, leaving her their small homestead 5 miles outside of town, and debts that had taken every cent she could scrape together to pay off. Her mother had passed when Clara was just a girl of 9, leaving behind only faded memories and a silver locket that Clara wore around her neck always. The general store smelled of coffee beans and leather, of pickle brine and new fabric. Clara's stomach twisted with hunger as she passed barrels of salted pork and sacks of cornmeal. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, when she finished the last of her potato soup, and even that had been mostly water. Her garden had yielded poorly this summer, with the heat being so relentless, and the 3 chickens she kept had stopped laying weeks ago. She suspected a fox was stressing them, but she had no money for new wire to reinforce their coop. Mr. Morrison stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his bulbous nose as he tallied figures in his ledger. He glanced up when Clara approached, and something like pity flickered across his weathered face before he schooled his expression into professional neutrality. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a nod. "Mr. Morrison." Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and straightened her spine, summoning whatever dignity she had left. "I need to know what 3 pennies will buy me." She placed the coins on the wooden counter, and they clinked together with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet store. Mr. Morrison looked at the pennies, then at Clara's face, then back at the pennies. "Well now," he said slowly, rubbing his jaw, 3 pennies, that would get you about half a pound of cornmeal, or maybe a 1/4 pound of dried beans. Clara's heart sank. She had hoped for a small loaf of bread, something that would last her a few days if she was careful. Cornmeal required oil or lard to cook properly, and she had neither. The beans would need to soak overnight and cook for hours, using firewood she could not spare. "What about bread?" she asked, hating the desperate edge that crept into her voice. "Do you have any day-old bread?" "Mister." Morrison shook his head. "Fresh loaves are 5 pennies, Miss Whitmore. I sold the last of yesterday's batch this morning to the widow Patterson." Clara nodded, pulling her hand back toward the pennies. Maybe she could find wild onions growing by the creek. Maybe she could catch a fish if she was patient enough. Maybe... "However," Mr. Morrison said, his voice gentler now, "I have a loaf here that's perhaps a touch smaller than the others. Could let it go for 3 pennies. He reached under the counter and produced a loaf that looked perfectly normal, sized to Clara's eyes. She knew charity when she saw it, and part of her wanted to refuse, to hold on to her pride like it was something precious. But pride would not fill her stomach or give her the strength to work her land. "Thank you," she whispered, sliding the pennies across the counter. That was when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze on her back, steady and unwavering. Clara turned her head slightly and saw him for the first time. He stood near the back of the store by the hardware section, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that brushed the collar of his work shirt. He wore dusty denim pants, scuffed leather boots, and a brown vest that had seen years of hard use. A cowboy, clearly, though he lacked the flashy spurs and fancy gun belt that some of the ranch hands favored. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her. Even from across the store, she could see they were a striking pale blue, like a winter sky, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He had been watching her count out her pennies like a miser counting gold, watching her beg for day-old bread, watching her accept charity disguised as happenstance. Shame burned hot in Clara's cheeks. She snatched the bread from the counter, mumbled another thank you to Mr. Morrison, and hurried toward the door with her head down. She did not look at the cowboy again, could not bear to see pity or contempt or whatever judgment surely lived in those pale eyes. The August sun hit her like a physical force when she stepped outside, and she stood on the wooden boardwalk for a moment, clutching her loaf of bread and trying to calm the hammering of her heart. The town square was quiet in the afternoon heat. A few horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies. Across the street, the saloon doors swung open and released a burst of piano music before falling shut again. Clara started the long walk home, the bread tucked under her arm. 5 miles on foot in this heat was no small thing, but she had no horse. She had sold her father's old mare 8 months ago to pay the land taxes. Her feet knew the way by heart now, following the rutted wagon road that led north out of town, past the scattered homesteads and cattle ranches, into the rolling prairie where her small house sat alone against the endless sky. She was perhaps a mile out of town when she heard the hoofbeats behind her. Clara stepped to the side of the road, expecting a rider to thunder past, but instead the horse slowed to a walk. She turned and felt her stomach drop. It was him, the cowboy from the store, riding a rangy buckskin gelding that looked as trail-hardened as its rider. He touched the brim of his hat as he drew alongside her, but he did not speak. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Up close, Clara could see the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, etched there by years of squinting into the sun. Could see the pale scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Could see the way his hands rested easy on his saddle horn, the hands of a man comfortable with horses and hard work. Can I help you?" Clara asked, injecting as much frost into her voice as she could manage. She was in no mood to be trifled with or pitied. The cowboy's expression did not change. He studied her for another heartbeat. Then, without a word, he clicked his tongue and urged his horse forward down the road. Clara watched him go, confused and irritated in equal measure. What had that been about? Was he trying to intimidate her, mock her poverty? She shook her head and resumed walking, pushing the strange encounter from her mind. By the time she reached her homestead, her feet ached and sweat had soaked through the back of her faded calico dress. The house was small, just 3 rooms with a stone chimney and a roof that leaked when it rained hard. The barn was in worse shape, listing slightly to one side, its red paint long since weathered to gray. The well still worked, thank God, and the land itself was good. 40 acres of prairie that could support crops or cattle, if only Clara had the money for seed or livestock. She drew water from the well and drank deeply, then splashed her face and neck. The chickens clucked hopefully from their coop, and she felt a stab of guilt that she had nothing to feed them. Tomorrow she would dig for worms, maybe scatter what little cracked corn she had left. Inside the house, the heat was stifling. Clara opened the windows to encourage a cross breeze, then cut herself a thick slice of bread. She ate it slowly, making it last, then wrapped the rest carefully in a clean cloth and placed it in the pantry. The pantry. Clara stood in front of the open pantry door and felt tears prick her eyes. The shelves were nearly bare. A small sack of cornmeal, perhaps 2 cups worth. A jar with a handful of dried beans rattling at the bottom. A tin of salt. A single withered potato. That was all. That was everything between her and starvation. She closed the door firmly and pushed the tears back. Crying solved nothing. Tomorrow she would go to the creek and check the fishing lines she had set. She would gather whatever wild edibles she could find. She would chop more firewood and mend the fence in the east pasture, even though she had no animals to contain. She would survive because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed and listened to the coyotes singing in the distance. Sleep came fitfully, troubled by dreams of empty plates and her father's disappointed face and pale blue eyes that watched from shadows. She woke at dawn to the sound of her rooster crowing, grateful for the slightly cooler morning air. After washing her face and changing into her work dress, a sturdy brown cotton that had been patched more times than she could count, Clara ate another slice of bread and drank water from the pump. Then she gathered her fishing basket and set out for the creek. The walk was pleasant in the early morning, with meadowlarks singing from fence posts and the prairie grass still silver with dew. The creek ran year-round, fed by a spring somewhere in the low hills to the west, and it supported a healthy population of catfish and sunfish. Clara had learned to fish as a girl, sitting beside her father in companionable silence, and the skill had served her well this past year. She checked her lines and found 2 small catfish, which she considered a blessing. She cleaned them right there on the creek bank, then reset her lines with fresh bait. On the way back, she gathered a handful of wild onions and some dandelion greens. Not much, but enough to make a thin stew with the fish. As she crested the low hill that led to her homestead, Clara froze. There was a horse tied to her porch rail, a buckskin gelding. Her Her heart began to pound, and she approached slowly, cautiously. As she drew nearer, she saw him, the cowboy from the general store, standing on her porch as bold as brass, his arms full of something. Before she could call out or demand to know what he thought he was doing, he disappeared inside her house. Inside her house. Anger flared hot and bright in Clara's chest. She hitched up her skirts and ran the last 100 yards, her fishing basket bouncing against her hip. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" she shouted as she burst through her front door. The cowboy was in her kitchen, or what passed for a kitchen in her small home. He turned at the sound of her voice, his arms now empty, his expression calm. He did not look startled or guilty, or anything else that would have been appropriate for a man caught trespassing. Clara's eyes darted past him to the small kitchen table, and her breath left her in a rush. The table was covered with parcels wrapped in brown paper, sacks of flour and cornmeal, a paper-wrapped package that looked like bacon, a small crate of eggs, a tin of coffee, a jar of molasses, another of preserves. "You had no right," Clara said, but her voice had lost its heat. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed, like the world had tilted sideways. You cannot." The cowboy walked past her toward the door, moving with an easy, unhurried gait. He stepped out onto the porch, and Clara followed on unsteady legs. "Wait," she said. "Stop. Who are you? Why are you doing this?" He paused at the edge of the porch, his back to her. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually answer, might give her some explanation that would make sense of this bizarre charity. But he simply untied his horse, swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, and rode away without ever looking back. Clara stood on her porch and watched until he was just a dark speck on the horizon. Then nothing at all. Her hands were shaking. She set down her fishing basket and walked back inside on numb feet. The supplies were real. She touched each one, half convinced they would vanish like a mirage, but they remained solid under her fingertips. She opened the pantry door, the same pantry that had been nearly bare just yesterday, and began to put things away. Flour, 5 pounds at least. Cornmeal, a full sack. Coffee, real coffee, not chicory or roasted grain. Bacon, a whole slab. The eggs she left on the table, counting them. 1 dozen, perfect and unbroken. There were other things, too. A small bag of sugar, a packet of salt, dried apples, a tin of baking powder, lard for cooking. It was not a fortune, but it was more food than Clara had seen in her kitchen since before her father died. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs and pressed her hands to her face. She should be grateful. She was grateful. But she was also confused and embarrassed and angry. Who was this man who watched her humiliation in the general store, then rode out to her homestead like some kind of guardian angel? What did he want? What did he expect in return? Because men always expected something in return. Clara had not survived 2 years alone by being naive. She knew how the world worked, knew that women without protection were seen as easy prey by a certain type of man. She had rebuffed more than one unwanted advance in town, had learned to carry her father's old hunting knife in her pocket when she went out. But this did not feel like the prelude to unwanted attention. The cowboy had not leered or made suggestive comments. He had not tried to touch her or corner her. He had simply filled her pantry and left, all without speaking a single word. It made no sense. Clara spent the rest of the morning in a daze, going through the motions of her chores. She cooked the catfish with some of the lard and fried up a piece of the bacon. The smell alone was enough to make her weak with hunger. She ate until she was truly full for the first time in weeks, and the feeling was so foreign she almost did not recognize it. In the afternoon, she worked in her garden, pulling weeds and trying to coax life from her struggling plants. Her mind kept wandering back to the cowboy, those pale blue eyes, the quiet confidence in his movements, the way he had looked at her in the store, not with pity exactly, but with something else, something that felt like recognition, like seeing. 3 days passed, and Clara began to think that perhaps it had been a one-time thing, a strange, inexplicable act of kindness that she would never understand. She rationed the supplies carefully, determined to make them last as long as possible. She baked bread with the flour and molasses, made porridge with the cornmeal, fried eggs with strips of bacon. Each meal felt like a luxury. On the 4th day, she returned from checking her fishing lines to find her porch stacked with firewood. Clara stood in her yard and stared at it. Neatly split logs, enough to last through the winter if she was careful, Her own meager woodpile, the result of weeks of hard work with a dull axe, looked pitiful by comparison. He had been here again. In the middle of the day, while she was gone, the mysterious cowboy with his silent generosity. This time, Clara did not feel confusion or anger. She felt something closer to fear, not fear of the man himself, but fear of the hope that was beginning to take root in her chest. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope could break you when it proved false. She could not accept any more charity. It was not right. It was not proper. She had to find this man and make him stop. The next morning, Clara put on her least faded dress, the dark blue one with the white collar that had been her Sunday best 3 years ago. She pinned up her blonde hair, which had grown long and wild without money for a proper cut, and set out for town. The walk felt shorter today, perhaps because she had purpose driving her forward. Abilene was busier than it had been a few days earlier, with ranch hands in town for supplies and a few families shopping at the general store. Clara went straight to Morrison's and found the proprietor restocking shelves. "Mr. Morrison," she said, trying to sound casual, "I have a question about a customer of yours." The older man looked up, his expression curious. "Oh? Which customer would that be?" "A cowboy, tall, dark hair, blue eyes. He was in here about 4 days ago, same time I was." Recognition flickered across Mr. Morrison's face. "Ah, that would be Dalton Hayes. He is a rancher, has a spread about 10 miles northwest of here. Keeps to himself mostly. Comes to town maybe once a month for supplies." "Dalton Hayes," Clara repeated, tasting the name. It fit him somehow, strong and simple. "Do you know anything else about him, Mr.?" Morrison rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Been in these parts about 3 years, I reckon. Bought the old Mackenzie ranch when old Thomas died, and the widow wanted to move back east to her daughter. Works the place alone, from what I hear, except during branding season when he hires a few hands. Pays his bills on time, does not cause trouble. Why do you ask?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. "He has been helping me, bringing supplies to my homestead. I do not understand why." Understanding dawned in Mr. Morrison's eyes, followed by something that looked like approval. "That's so? Well, Miss Whitmore, seems to me that Dalton Hayes is a good man. Not many of those left in the world. If I were you, I might consider accepting his help with grace rather than suspicion." "But I cannot pay him back," Clara said, her voice dropping. "I have nothing to give in return." "Maybe he is not asking for anything in return, mister," Morrison said gently. "Maybe he just sees someone who needs help and has the means to provide it. That is not something to be ashamed of, on either side." Clara left the general store with more questions than answers. 10 miles northwest. She could not possibly walk that far in a day, and she had no horse. Even if she could reach his ranch, what would she say? "Thank you, and please stop"? It seemed absurd. She was halfway home when she heard hoofbeats again. This time, Clara turned to face him as he approached, planting her feet firmly in the road and lifting her chin. Dalton Hayes reined in his buckskin about 10 feet away, and for a long moment they stared at each other. "I know your name," Clara called out. "Dalton Hayes, Mr. Morrison told me." Something flickered in those pale blue eyes, but Dalton did not speak. "I want to thank you," Clara continued, forcing the words out, "for the food and the firewood. It was incredibly kind, but I cannot accept any more charity. I do not know what you want or why you are doing this, but I cannot be in debt to you." Dalton dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots hitting the dirt road with a soft thud. He walked toward her slowly, and Clara fought the urge to step back. He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough that she did not feel crowded. Then he spoke for the first time, and his voice was low and rough, like gravel tumbling in a stream. "No debt." Just 2 words, but they sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "I do not understand," she said. Dalton looked away, out across the prairie, and Clara saw a muscle jump in his jaw. When he looked back at her, there was something raw in his expression, something that looked like pain. "My mother," he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him, "starved to death when I was 12 years old. My father drank everything we had. She would go days without eating, making sure I had something in my belly. I was too young to understand until it was too late." Clara's breath caught. "I am so sorry." I watched you count those pennies, Dalton continued, his voice rough with emotion. And I saw her. I saw my mother, standing in a store just like that, trying to figure out how to make nothing into something. I cannot help her anymore. She has been gone 23 years. But I can help you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and painful. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. That is kind, she said softly. Truly. But I cannot. You can, Dalton interrupted, his eyes locking with hers. And I am not asking for anything. No debt, no obligation. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I just need to know you are not going hungry. Clara should have argued, should have insisted on her pride and independence. But the truth was that she had been slowly starving, and his help had quite possibly saved her life. There was no shame in admitting that. All right, she whispered. Thank you. Dalton nodded once, then turned back to his horse. But before he could mount, Clara spoke again. Wait, at least tell me where your ranch is, so I know where to find you, if I need to. 10 miles northwest, Dalton said. Follow Bitter Creek until you reach the cottonwoods, then head west. You will see the house. Then he was gone again, riding away in that same unhurried manner, leaving Clara standing in the road, with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. Over the following weeks, a strange routine developed. Every few days, Clara would find something new waiting for her. Never when she was home, always when she was out checking her traps or fishing or working in the far corner of her property. A sack of potatoes left on her porch, a basket of fresh vegetables, clearly from someone's thriving garden since hers was still struggling, a jar of honey, a smoked ham. And always it was done without a word. Dalton Hayes was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing without sound or ceremony. Clara told herself she should be irritated by his presumption, by the way he simply decided she needed help and provided it without asking permission. But the truth was harder to ignore. She was surviving now, more than surviving. She was eating regular meals, had fuel for her fire, was slowly building up reserves for the harsh Kansas winter. And she found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering what he was doing on his ranch 10 miles away, wondering if he thought about her too, or if she was just a charitable project to ease his conscience, wondering what it would be like to actually have a conversation with him, more than just a few terse sentences exchanged on a dusty road. September arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures, and the first hints of autumn in the changing light. Clara's garden finally began to produce in earnest, yielding squash and beans and a few late tomatoes. She harvested everything carefully, drying and preserving what she could. She felt stronger now, both physically and mentally. The constant gnawing hunger was gone, replaced by steady energy that allowed her to tackle the endless work of maintaining a homestead alone. One afternoon, she was on her roof patching a leak with tar and shingles she had salvaged from the barn when she heard a horse approaching. She looked down, and there he was, Dalton Hayes, sitting astride his buckskin and looking up at her with what might have been concern. Afternoon, Clara called down, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes and surely leaving a streak of tar across her forehead in the process. Dalton dismounted and walked closer, tilting his head back to see her better. That is dangerous work. It needs doing, Clara said. Roof leaks whenever it rains. I can do it. I am already doing it. They stared at each other, Clara on the roof with tar on her hands, Dalton in the yard with his hat tipped back. Then, surprisingly, his mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Yes, you are, he said. Something about his tone, about the hint of approval in it, made Clara feel warm despite the September breeze. She turned back to her work, aware of him watching, and tried to focus on spreading the tar evenly. You should nail the shingles before the tar dries, Dalton called up. I know that, Clara called back, unable to keep the smile out of her voice. Just making sure. Clara laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised her. When was the last time she had laughed? When was the last time anything had felt light or easy? She finished the patch job and climbed down the ladder, wiping her hands on a rag. Dalton was still there, leaning against the porch rail like he had all the time in the world. Would you like some coffee? Clara heard herself ask. I have some, thanks to you. Dalton hesitated, and Clara saw something like uncertainty flash across his face. Then he nodded. That would be fine. They sat on the porch, drinking coffee from chipped mugs, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. It was companionable, easy in a way Clara had not expected. They did not talk much, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It felt instead like two people who understood that some things did not need words. "Your ranch?" Clara said eventually. "Do you really run it alone?" "Mostly. I have two hands who help during busy times, but day to day, it is just me." "That must be hard work." "No harder than what you're doing here," Dalton said, nodding toward her fields and barn. "You are managing 40 acres by yourself. That is not easy." Clara shrugged. "I do not have much choice. Neither did I when I started, but we figure it out. We survive." There was understanding in his words, a recognition of shared struggle that made Clara feel less alone than she had in 2 years. "Why did you come to Abilene?" she asked. "Wanted land of my own. I worked as a ranch hand for years, saved everything I earned. When the Mackenzie place came available, I bought it. Simple as that." "And you have been here 3 years?" "About that." Dalton turned to look at her, his pale blue eyes serious. "I have seen you in town before, Miss Whitmore, before that day at the general store." Clara's heart skipped. "You have?" "Last winter. You were at the feed store, buying chicken scratch. The clerk shorted you on the weight, and you did not say anything." Clara remembered. She had known the bag was light, but she had been too tired to argue, too worn down to fight for herself. "I should have said something," she admitted. "He should not have cheated you," Dalton said, his voice hard. "I had words with him after you left. He did not do it again." Clara stared at him. "You did that for me?" "I did that because it was not right." They finished their coffee as the sky turned orange and pink, and when Dalton finally stood to leave, Clara found herself reluctant to see him go. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee break, and for everything else." Dalton settled his hat on his head and looked at her for a long moment. "You are doing fine, Clara Whitmore. Better than fine. Anyone can see you are a fighter." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sounded right coming from him, natural. "Call me Clara," she said. "Just Clara." "Just Clara," he repeated, and this time he definitely smiled. "You can call me Dalton." After that day, things changed. Dalton still left supplies when she was away, still chopped firewood and left it stacked neatly by her door. But now he also stayed sometimes. He would arrive in the late afternoon and help her with whatever heavy work needed doing, mending her barn door or reinforcing her chicken coop, or helping her turn the soil in her garden to prepare it for winter. They would share a simple meal afterward, talking more easily each time, learning the details of each other's lives. Clara learned that Dalton was 35 years old, had been born in Missouri, and had spent most of his life working ranches across the West. He had no family left, except a sister in California he had not seen in a decade. His ranch ran about 200 head of cattle, and he hoped to expand in the coming years if the market stayed strong. Dalton learned that Clara had grown up on this homestead, that her father had claimed the land in 1860 when the Homestead Act made it possible for ordinary people to own property. She had been a teacher briefly before her father got sick and needed her full-time care. She loved to read, but had no money for books. She missed her mother every single day, even though the memories were fading around the edges. October brought frost in the mornings and the first hard freeze. Clara woke one day to find her chicken coop reinforced with new wire and sturdy posts, clearly the work of several hours. Dalton had done it in the night, not wanting to be thanked or acknowledged, but Clara was done with him doing everything in secret. That evening, she saddled her father's old workhorse, which Dalton had quietly returned to her weeks earlier, claiming he had found it wandering loose, and rode the 10 miles to his ranch. The sun was setting as she found the place, a neat homestead tucked into a valley where Bitter Creek ran year-round. The house was larger than hers, solidly built with a stone foundation and a good barn. Cattle dotted the surrounding hillsides, fat and healthy. It was clear that Dalton knew what he was doing, that this was a man who could turn hard work into prosperity. She found him in the barn, brushing down his buckskin. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway, surprise clear on his face. "Clara, you fixed my chicken coop," she said without preamble. It needed fixing. In the middle of the night, Dalton set down his brush and turned to face her fully. "I did not want to disturb you." "Dalton Hayes," Clara said, walking into the barn with more confidence than she felt. "You have been helping me for 2 months now. You have kept me fed and warm and probably saved my life. Do not you think we are past the point of you sneaking around in the dark?" Something shifted in Dalton's expression, a wall coming down. "I did not want to presume," he said quietly. "Did not want you to feel obligated to anything." "Obligated?" Clara stopped a few feet from him. "Dalton, I am grateful, truly, but I am not here because I feel obligated. I am here because I wanted to see you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Dalton's eyes searched her face, and Clara saw hope flickering there, fragile and uncertain. "You wanted to see me," he repeated, like he was testing the words. "Yes," Clara said simply. "Is that all right?" Instead of answering with words, Dalton closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped just in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell the scent of leather and horses and something uniquely him. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "I have been wanting to ask you something for weeks now, but I did not know if I had the right." "Ask me," Clara whispered. "Can I court you? Properly, I mean. Can I come calling at your door like a gentleman instead of leaving things on your porch like some kind of outlaw?" Joy bloomed in Clara's chest, bright and sudden. Yes, you can court me." Dalton's smile was like sunrise, transforming his serious face into something radiant. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused and gentle, and Clara shivered at the touch. "I should tell you," she said, her voice unsteady. "I have not been courted before. I do not know the rules." "Neither have I," Dalton admitted. "We will figure it out together." He invited her into his house, and Clara saw that it was clean and well kept, furnished simply but comfortably. He made her dinner, frying steaks from his own cattle and boiling potatoes, and they ate together at his kitchen table as darkness fell outside. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Clara told him about her dreams of expanding her homestead, maybe getting sheep or a few cattle of her own. Dalton told her about wanting to build something lasting, something that would endure beyond his own lifetime. They discovered shared values, similar ways of seeing the world. Both had been shaped by hardship, but not broken by it. Both understood the value of hard work and honesty, and keeping your word. When Clara finally rode home that night, the moon was high and full, turning the prairie silver. Her heart felt full too, filled with a happiness she had almost forgotten was possible. Dalton had wanted to escort her home, but she had insisted she knew the way, and besides, she needed time alone to process everything that had happened. He was courting her. Dalton Hayes, the silent cowboy who had filled her pantry without a word, wanted to court her properly. The next Sunday, Dalton arrived at her door in the afternoon, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes. He helped her with her chores first, insisting that work came before pleasure, then took her on a long ride across the prairie. They followed Bitter Creek to where it pooled into a wide pond, and they sat on the bank, watching dragonflies skim the surface. "I have something for you," Dalton said, pulling a small package from his saddlebag. Clara unwrapped it carefully and found a book, a real book, bound in leather with gold lettering. It was a collection of poems by Walt Whitman, and when she opened the cover, she saw that it was a new copy, not used or worn. "Dalton," she breathed, "this is too much. You said you missed reading. I thought—" He trailed off, looking uncertain. "If you do not like poetry, I can—" Clara silenced him by leaning over and kissing his cheek. It was a brief, chaste kiss, but it made Dalton go very still. "I love it," Clara said softly. "Thank you." They sat close together after that, Dalton's arm eventually finding its way around her shoulders, and Clara rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she felt safer than she had in years. The courtship continued through October and into November. Dalton came to visit 3 or 4 times a week, always arriving with some excuse about needing to check on her livestock or repair something on her property. They would work together, then share meals, then sit and talk until the stars came out. Sometimes they would ride out across the prairie, exploring the land they both loved. Other times they would stay close to home, content just to be in each other's company. Clara found herself falling in love, slowly, steadily, like water wearing smooth a stone. It was not the wild, reckless passion of dime novels. It was something deeper, built on respect and understanding, and the recognition that they were stronger together than apart. She saw it in the way Dalton looked at her when he thought she was not watching, like she was something precious. She felt it in the way he touched her, always gentle, always respectful, but with a tenderness that made her breath catch. She heard it in his voice when he said her name, like it was a prayer, and she knew he felt the same about her. She saw it in his eyes when she laughed at something he said, saw pleasure in making her happy. She felt it when he held her hand, his calloused fingers interlaced with hers. She heard it in the way he talked about the future, always saying we instead of I. In late November, the first real snow came, blanketing the prairie in white. Clara woke to find her entire woodpile covered with a tarp and 6 more cords of split wood stacked beside it. Her barn door, which had been hanging crooked, was rehung on new hinges, and on her porch was a crate containing jars of preserved vegetables, smoked meat, and sacks of flour and beans. Dalton arrived that afternoon on horseback, pushing through the snowdrifts. Clara met him at the door, wrapped in a shawl, and she was smiling. "You never stop, do you?" she said. "Stop what?" Dalton asked innocently, stomping snow from his boots. "Taking care of me." "Never," Dalton said seriously, looking into her eyes. "I will never stop taking care of you, Clara." The words were weighted with meaning, with promise. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Come inside," she said. "You must be frozen." They sat by her fire, drinking hot coffee and eating the cinnamon rolls Clara had baked that morning. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside it was warm and cozy. "Clara," Dalton said after a while, setting down his coffee mug, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Clara's heart began to pound. "All right. Are you happy with this, with us? Because if you are not, if you are just going along with this because you feel grateful or obligated, I need to know. I could not stand to think I was taking advantage of your situation." Clara reached over and took his hand, holding it tightly. "Dalton Hayes, I have never felt obligated to you, not for a single moment. What I feel is—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I am falling in love with you. No, I have already fallen. I love you." The words hung in the air between them, true and clear. Dalton's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed frozen. Then he moved, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight against his chest. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Clara, I have loved you since the day I saw you counting those pennies. I have loved you every day since." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling beside them and the snow falling outside. When they finally pulled apart, Dalton cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her properly, deeply, with all the pent-up longing of the past months. Clara kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. Love and gratitude and desire and hope. All of it, given freely. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only been courting a few months, but I cannot imagine my life without you. Marry me, Clara." "Yes," Clara said immediately, joy bursting through her like sunlight. "Yes, I will marry you." Dalton kissed her again, and Clara felt like she was flying, like all the hardship and loneliness of the past 2 years had led her to exactly this moment, this man, this love. They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning, in the small church in Abilene. Clara wore a new dress, pale green with lace at the collar, that Dalton had insisted on buying for her. She carried a small bouquet of dried flowers and holly berries. Dalton wore his best suit, dark wool that made his blue eyes even more striking, and when he looked at her walking down the aisle, his expression was one of pure wonder. Mr. Morrison stood as witness, along with the widow Patterson and the minister's wife. It was a small ceremony, simple and quiet, but it was perfect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Dalton kissed her, Clara felt like the luckiest woman in the world. They held a small reception in the church hall, with cake and coffee and well wishes from the few townspeople who had come. Clara felt surrounded by genuine warmth and goodwill, and she realized that she was no longer alone. She had Dalton now, and she had a community that cared about her. After the reception, Dalton lifted her onto his horse, and they rode together to his ranch, which was now her ranch too. Their ranch. Clara looked back once at the town of Abilene, then turned forward, toward the future. The ranch house was warm when they arrived, and Clara saw that Dalton had prepared for her arrival. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the kitchen table, despite it being December. The bedroom had been cleaned and aired, and the bed was made up with new quilts. It was clear he had put thought and care into making her feel welcome. "This is your home now," Dalton said, carrying her bags inside. "Everything I have is yours." Clara looked around the house that would be hers, at the man who was now her husband, and felt peace settle over her like a benediction. That night, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Dalton made love to her with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, and Clara felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. "I cannot believe this is real," she whispered. Dalton tightened his arms around her. "It is real. You are my wife. I am your husband. This is our life now." "Our life," Clara repeated, smiling in the darkness. The winter passed in a cocoon of happiness. Clara moved all her belongings from her old homestead to the ranch, and they decided to rent out her 40 acres to a young family looking to start farming. The rental income would help, and Clara felt good about giving someone else a chance at the dream her father had worked so hard to build. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Dalton care for the cattle, feeding the chickens they kept, tending the large garden plot they would plant in spring. She learned to ride better, to rope cattle, to mend tack. Dalton taught her patiently, never mocking when she made mistakes, always encouraging her to try again. In return, Clara brought warmth and life to the ranch house. She cooked proper meals, filling the house with the scent of baking bread and roasting meat. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. She filled the house with small touches that made it feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep between long days of work. They talked about everything, their pasts, their hopes, their dreams. Dalton told her stories about his years working ranches across the West, the good bosses and the bad, the dangers and the beauty. Clara told him about her childhood, about her mother's death and her father's slow decline, about the loneliness of the past 2 years. "You will never be lonely again," Dalton promised her one night as they lay in bed. "I will make sure of it." And he kept that promise. Even during the busiest times, when he worked from dawn until after dark, he always made time for Clara, always asked about her day, always listened when she talked, always touched her gently as he passed by, a hand on her shoulder or a kiss on her forehead. Small gestures that said, "I see you, I love you, you matter to me." Spring came, bringing warmer weather and new life. Clara planted an ambitious garden, vegetables and flowers both, and watched with satisfaction as everything sprouted and grew. The cattle grew fat on the new grass, and Dalton hired 2 ranch hands to help with the spring branding. In April, Clara realized her monthly bleeding had not come. Then May passed with no bleeding either. She waited another week, afraid to hope, then rode into town to see Dr. Hartwell. The doctor examined her and confirmed what she suspected. She was pregnant, about 3 months along by his estimation. The baby would come in late October or early November. Clara rode home in a daze, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach. A baby. She was going to have a baby. She and Dalton were going to be parents. She found him in the barn, repairing a saddle, and she stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him work. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, that special smile he saved just for her. "How was town?" he asked. "Good." Clara walked toward him slowly. "Dalton, I have something to tell you." He set down the saddle, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Dalton just stared at her. Then his face transformed, lit from within by pure joy. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice choked. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Clara laughed, holding tight to his shoulders. Dalton set her down gently, then dropped to his knees in front of her. He pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapped around her waist, and Clara felt him shake with silent sobs. She stroked his hair, her own tears falling. She understood what this meant to him. A family. Something he had lost as a boy and never thought he would have again. A chance to do things right, to give a child the love and security he had been denied. "We are going to be good parents," she said softly. "Our child will never go hungry, never feel unloved. We are going to give them everything." Dalton looked up at her, his eyes wet. Everything, he agreed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued working around the ranch, though Dalton fretted constantly about her overdoing it. She felt strong and healthy, with only occasional bouts of morning sickness. As her belly grew, Dalton became even more attentive, always making sure she was comfortable, always ready to fetch whatever she needed. He built a cradle in the evenings, working by lamplight to carve the wood smooth and join it perfectly. He built a high chair and a toy chest. He talked to Clara's growing belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the land, about the mother they would have, and how much they were already loved. In October, Clara's pains started in the middle of the night. Dalton rode through the darkness to fetch the doctor and the midwife, then paced the house like a caged animal while Clara labored. She could hear him through the bedroom door, his boots on the wooden floor, his low voice praying. The birth was long and difficult, taking nearly 20 hours from first pain to final push. But when their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Clara thought it was worth every moment of pain. Dalton burst into the room the moment the midwife allowed him in. He fell to his knees beside the bed, where Clara lay exhausted but smiling, holding their son in her arms. "It is a boy," she said softly. "A son." Dalton reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fist. The infant's fingers wrapped instinctively around his father's finger, and Dalton made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this gift." They named him James, after Clara's father, and Thomas, after Dalton's best friend, who had died in a cattle stampede years before. James Thomas Hayes, heir to the ranch and the most loved baby in Kansas. The early months of parenthood were exhausting, but joyful. James was a healthy baby, with a good appetite and strong lungs. Dalton was a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with an expression of perpetual wonder. Clara watched her husband become a father and fell in love with him all over again. He was so gentle with James, so patient, so completely devoted. She would find him sometimes in the nursery, just watching the baby sleep, and the love on his face made her heart ache in the best way. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara cared for James while Dalton worked the ranch, but they carved out time each day to be together as a family. Evenings were spent in the parlor, James on a blanket on the floor, while Dalton and Clara talked or read. Sundays, they would take the baby for rides around the ranch, showing him the land that would one day be his. When James was 6 months old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their second son, Daniel Matthew Hayes, arrived in August of 1878 after a much shorter labor. Daniel looked like his mother, with blonde hair and a sunny disposition, while James favored his father with dark hair and serious blue eyes. 2 sons, 2 healthy, happy boys. Dalton could hardly believe his good fortune. He expanded the ranch, buying more land and cattle, building a future for his growing family. Clara helped where she could, managing the household accounts, tending an even larger garden, raising their boys to be kind and strong and honest. In 1880, their daughter Sarah was born, and Dalton declared himself the luckiest man alive. Sarah was small and fierce, with her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. She kept her older brothers in line and wrapped her father completely around her tiny finger. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the largest and most successful in the region. Dalton hired more hands, built a larger barn, increased his herd. But no matter how busy he was, he always made time for his family, always came home for dinner, always tucked his children into bed, always held his wife close in the darkness and whispered how much he loved her. Clara thrived too. She was no longer the desperate woman counting pennies for bread. She was a mother, a rancher's wife, a woman of substance and respect in the community. She helped organize the church socials, taught Sunday school, volunteered at the town school, but more than that, she was happy. Deeply, profoundly happy, in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days after her father's death. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she and Dalton would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the prairie. The children would be in bed, the day's work done, and it would be just the two of them, like in the early days of their marriage. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Clara asked one such evening, her hand in his. "In Morrison's store. You were counting pennies for bread, Dalton's voice was soft with memory. "I was so ashamed, so angry that you had seen me like that." "I was angry too," Dalton said. "Angry at a world that would let someone like you go hungry. Angry at myself for not acting sooner." Clara squeezed his hand. "You saved my life, you know. I do not think I would have made it through that winter without your help." "You would have survived," Dalton said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, Clara. But I am glad I could help. Glad I had the courage to act on what I felt." "What did you feel?" Clara asked, even though she knew the answer. She just liked hearing him say it. "Love. I felt love, even then. I looked at you and saw my future. I just did not know if you would want me in yours." "I wanted you," Clara said softly. "From the moment you started helping me, from the first time we really talked, I wanted you. I was just afraid to believe it could be real." "It is real," Dalton said, pulling her close. "This life, this love, these children, all of it is real, and I thank God for it every single day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. From inside the house came the sound of one of the boys calling for water, and Clara started to rise, but Dalton stopped her. "I will get it," he said. "You rest." Clara watched him go inside, heard his low voice comforting their son, and smiled. This was her life now, this beautiful, full, abundant life. She had gone from counting pennies for bread to having a full pantry, a loving husband, 3 healthy children, and a future bright with promise. Sometimes miracles came in the form of quiet cowboys who filled your pantry without a word. Sometimes love began with an act of kindness from a stranger who understood hunger and loneliness. Sometimes salvation wore dusty boots and had pale blue eyes that saw you when you felt invisible. In 1883, Clara gave birth to their 4th and final child, another daughter named Rose. By this time, James was nearly 8 years old and took his role as big brother very seriously. Daniel was 5 and full of mischief. Sarah was 3 and determined to keep up with her brothers in everything. The house was noisy and chaotic and absolutely full of love. Dalton was 42 now, with silver threading through his dark hair. Clara was 30, and she felt like she had lived 3 lifetimes. The desperate, starving woman she had been 7 years ago seemed like a different person entirely. That Clara had been surviving. This Clara was living. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They now ran over 500 head of cattle and employed 8 full-time ranch hands. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, with proper bedrooms for each of the children, and even a parlor with a piano that Clara had learned to play. They had become pillars of the community, respected and admired. But the best moments were still the quiet ones. Dalton teaching James to rope, Clara braiding Sarah's hair, all of them sitting down to dinner together, the table full of food and laughter, bedtime stories and morning kisses and Sunday picnics by Bitter Creek. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Clara with a trip to Kansas City. They left the children with the widow Patterson, who had become like a grandmother to them, and took the train to the city. It was Clara's first time on a train, her first time in a real city, and she was dazzled by it all. The tall buildings, the electric lights, the shops full of wonders. Dalton took her to a fine restaurant where they ate food Clara could not even pronounce. He bought her a new dress, emerald green silk, that made her feel like a princess. They went to see a play at a real theater, and Clara cried at the beauty of it all. But the best part was just being alone together, remembering what it had been like when it was just the 2 of them. They talked late into the night in their hotel room, making love and laughing and planning for the future. "I want to send the children to good schools," Dalton said. "I want them to have opportunities I never had." "They will," Clara assured him. "We will make sure of it. And when they are grown, the ranch will be theirs, all of it. I want to build something that will last for generations." "We already have," Clara said, touching his face. "We have built a family, Dalton. We have built a life full of love. That is the best legacy we could leave." Dalton kissed her palm. "I love you, Clara Hayes. Every single day I thank God that I walked into that general store when I did, that I had the courage to help you, that you gave me a chance." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "You are the best man I have ever known, the best husband, the best father. Our children are so lucky to have you. We are lucky to have each other." They returned home to chaos and joy, with all 4 children clamoring for their attention and stories about the trip. Clara hugged each of them tight, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was her life, this beautiful, noisy, perfect life. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew and thrived. James became a serious, studious boy who loved books as much as ranch work. Daniel was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring. Sarah was determined and fierce, already declaring she would run the ranch someday. Rose was the sweet one, gentle and kind, always caring for injured birds and baby animals. Dalton and Clara grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were cattle lost to disease and hands who quit without notice. There were arguments and misunderstandings and days when they were both too tired to do more than fall into bed. But through it all, their foundation held firm. They were partners in every sense, working together to build their life. Dalton never made a major decision without consulting Clara, and Clara trusted Dalton's judgment completely. They respected each other, supported each other, loved each other with a steadiness that never wavered. In 1890, James left for college in the East, the first in their family to pursue higher education. Clara cried for a week, missing her firstborn, but she was also fiercely proud. Dalton had insisted on the best education money could buy, and James had earned a scholarship besides. Daniel followed 3 years later, heading to agricultural school to learn modern farming techniques. Sarah declared she had no interest in college and instead focused on learning every aspect of ranch management. Rose, still young, talked about becoming a teacher like her mother had once been. Dalton and Clara watched their children grow into capable, kind adults and felt pride beyond measure. This was what they had built together, not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy of love and hard work and integrity. On a spring evening in 1895, nearly 20 years after that day in Morrison's general store, Dalton and Clara sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 50s now, their children mostly grown, their hair gray. But they still held hands like newlyweds, still found comfort in each other's presence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Dalton asked. "The day I first saw you?" "All the time," Clara admitted. "I think about how desperate I was, how hopeless I felt. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I had prayed. I think about it too. I think about how close I came to not acting. I almost rode away, Clara. I almost convinced myself it was not my business, that you would not want help from a stranger." Clara turned to look at him, her hand tightening on his. "But you did not ride away. You chose to act. You chose kindness, and that choice changed everything." "It changed my life," Dalton said softly. "You changed my life. Before you, I was just existing, working, surviving, but not really living. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family. You gave me love." "You gave me all of those things too," Clara said, her eyes shining with tears. "You saved me, Dalton. In every way a person can be saved." They kissed then, a gentle kiss that held 20 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they pulled apart, Clara rested her head on Dalton's shoulder and looked out at the land they had built together. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and beautiful. The house behind them was full of memories and laughter. Their children were grown and thriving. Their love had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. "We did well," Clara said softly. "Did not we? We built something good." "We built something great," Dalton corrected. "And it all started with you counting pennies for bread, and me finding the courage to fill your pantry." "Without a single word," Clara added with a smile. "I have made up for that since," Dalton said, laughing. "I have told you I love you at least once a day for 20 years. "At least twice a day," Clara corrected. "And I never get tired of hearing it." "Good," Dalton said, pulling her closer. "Because I plan to keep saying it for the rest of our lives." And he did. Through the years that followed, through grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow, Dalton told Clara he loved her, and she told him the same. They grew old together on their ranch, watching their legacy continue through their children and grandchildren. James became a lawyer, but returned to Kansas to practice, settling nearby so he could visit often. Daniel took over the management of the ranch when Dalton retired, running it with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. Sarah married a neighboring rancher and ran her own successful cattle operation. Rose became a teacher just as she had dreamed and taught in the Abilene school for 40 years. The ranch stayed in the Hayes family, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love and partnership over loneliness and pride. And it all began on a dusty August day in 1876 when a desperate woman counted pennies for bread and a quiet cowboy decided to fill her pantry without a single word. It began with an act of kindness that blossomed into love. It began with seeing someone else's need and having the courage to meet it. It began, as all the best love stories do, with two people finding each other exactly when they needed each other most. Clara Whitmore Hayes passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Dalton Hayes followed her just 3 months later, unable to imagine a world without his beloved wife in it. They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking their ranch, beneath a sky so wide and blue it seemed to go on forever. Their children engraved their shared headstone with words that captured the essence of their love story. She counted pennies. He filled her pantry. Together, they built a legacy of love. And in Abilene, Kansas, for generations to come, people told the story of the cowboy and the widow, of the silent kindness that sparked a great love, of two people who proved that miracles can come in the form of a loaf of bread and a man brave enough to care. It was a story about surviving and thriving, about loneliness and love, about the transformative power of seeing another person's need and choosing to act. It was a story about the Wild West, when life was hard and love was precious, and small acts of kindness could change the course of two lives forever. It was a story about building something lasting in a temporary world, about creating beauty and love in harsh conditions, about two souls finding their home in each other. Most of all, it was a story about how the greatest adventures often begin in the most ordinary moments, in a general store on a hot August day, with 3 pennies and a loaf of bread, with a cowboy who watched and decided to act, with a woman brave enough to accept help and give love in return. Their children kept the ranch thriving for decades after their parents' deaths, and they made sure every generation knew the story, knew how their grandmother had nearly starved, knew how their grandfather had filled her pantry without a word, knew that from that simple act of kindness had grown a family tree that spread across Kansas and beyond. The original homestead where Clara had lived alone was preserved and eventually donated to the Kansas Historical Society. It became a museum dedicated to the lives of frontier women, and Clara's story was featured prominently. Visitors could see the pantry where Dalton had left his gifts, could read excerpts from Clara's journals about those difficult years, could learn about the strength and resilience it took for a woman to survive alone in the 1870s. But more than the struggle, the museum celebrated the love. There were photographs of Dalton and Clara throughout their lives, young and newly married, looking at each other with wonder, middle-aged with their 4 children, strong and prosperous, old and silver-haired, still holding hands on their porch. Each photograph told a story of enduring love, of partnership, of 2 people who had chosen each other and never regretted that choice. There were letters, too, saved by the family, letters Dalton had written to Clara during his rare trips away from the ranch, letters Clara had written to her children when they were grown and gone, all of them filled with love and wisdom and gratitude for the life they had built together. One letter in particular, written by Clara to her daughter Sarah shortly before Clara's death, was framed and displayed prominently in the museum. "My dear Sarah, you asked me about love, about how to build a marriage that lasts. I can only tell you what your father and I learned together. Love is not just feeling, it is action. It is choosing every day to be kind, to be generous, to see your partner's needs and meet them. Your father taught me that when he filled my pantry all those years ago. He saw me struggling and he acted, not for recognition or reward, but simply because he could not stand to see another person suffer. That is the foundation of our love, not grand gestures or passionate declarations, though we had those too, but everyday kindness, everyday choosing each other. That is what builds a life together. That is what creates a love that endures." Visitors to the museum would read those words and feel moved. Many would leave with tears in their eyes, touched by the simple truth of it. Love as action, love as choice, love as everyday kindness. The story of Dalton and Clara Hayes became more than just family history. It became a reminder that in the hardest times, human kindness could make all the difference. that seeing another person struggle and choosing to help, even in small ways, could change lives. That love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings and flourish into something beautiful and lasting. In the town of Abilene, now grown into a small city, there was a park named Hayes Park, donated by the family in memory of Dalton and Clara. In the center stood a bronze statue of a cowboy and a woman, the cowboy's arms full of packages, the woman looking at him with an expression of wonder and hope. The plaque at the base read, "In memory of Dalton and Clara Hayes, whose love story began with a simple act of kindness and grew into a legacy that touched generations. May we all have the courage to see need and act on compassion. May we all be blessed with a love that endures." Every year on their wedding anniversary, descendants of the Hayes family would gather at the statue for a celebration. There would be music and food and storytelling. The eldest members would share memories passed down through generations. The youngest would learn about their great-great-grandparents and the foundation upon which their family was built. And always, someone would retell the original story. How Clara had counted pennies for bread. How Dalton had watched and made a choice. How he had filled her pantry without a word. How that silent kindness had sparked a conversation, then a courtship, then a marriage that became legendary. The story never got old. Each telling revealed new depths, new appreciation for what their ancestors had built. Because Dalton and Clara had not just created a successful ranch or raised good children, they had created a template for how to love well, how to be partners, how to build something that mattered. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand before the statue and feel connected to something larger than themselves. They would understand that they were part of a story that began in hardship and ended in triumph, that they carried forward a legacy of kindness and love and hard work, that they had a responsibility to honor that legacy by living lives of integrity and compassion. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie, locals swore you could still feel them there. Dalton and Clara Hayes, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created, still holding hands, still choosing each other, still proving that the greatest love stories are not about perfection, but about partnership, about seeing and being seen, about filling empty pantries and empty hearts with generosity and love. The Wild West had been a hard place, a dangerous place, a place where survival required strength and determination. But it had also been a place where love could flourish against all odds, where two people could meet across a general store and recognize in each other a kindred spirit, where a loaf of bread could be the beginning of forever. That was the real legacy of Dalton and Clara Hayes, not the land or the money or the successful descendants, though those were all wonderful. The real legacy was the proof that love, real love, begins with seeing another person truly, with caring enough to act, with the courage to be vulnerable and accept help when you need it, with choosing every single day to be kind. And so, their story lived on, passed down through generations, a beacon of hope and inspiration, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that miracles can be quiet and simple, that a cowboy filling a pantry without a word can be the first chapter of the greatest love story ever told. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardship that had brought them together, but the love that had sustained them. Not the hunger Clara had known, but the abundance they had created together. Not the loneliness of her past, but the family that had grown from the seeds of Dalton's kindness. They had built something beautiful, something lasting, something worth remembering and celebrating and learning from. And it all started with 3 pennies, a loaf of bread, and a man who saw a woman's need and decided to act. That was the story of Dalton and Clara Hayes. That was their legacy. That was the proof that love, true love, can conquer anything. Even hunger, even loneliness, even despair, love wins. In the end, love always wins. And somewhere, in the wide Kansas sky, 2 souls were together still, forever bound by the choice they had made all those years ago, to see each other, to help each other, to love each other, to build a life together that would echo through time. That was their happily ever after. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Not the end of their struggles, but the beginning of a joy that would outlast them both. And in the hearts of everyone who heard their story, a seed was planted, a seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, they too could find that kind of love, that kind of partnership, that kind of life. Because of a desperate woman counting pennies and a quiet cowboy filling a pantry could create something so beautiful, so lasting, so meaningful, then anything was possible. That was the final gift Dalton and Clara Hayes gave to the world. Not just their story, but the hope it inspired. The belief that kindness matters, that love endures, that two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, can create something that will never die. Their bodies might have returned to the Kansas earth, but their love lived on, in their descendants, in their story, in the hearts of everyone who heard how it all began, on a hot August day in 1876, when everything changed because one man had the courage to care. And that, truly, was the end and the end of their earthly story, and the beginning of their eternal legacy. A legacy of love that would never fade, never diminish, never be forgotten. That was the story of how he watched her count pennies for a loaf of bread, and how the cowboy filled her pantry without a single word, and how from that simple act, a great love was born. The end.